Today we are joined by Jaison Morgan, founder and CEO of Common Pool, a platform to promote competition-based strategies to giving. Approaches to philanthropy continue to evolve, and there are many new tools and technologies available for funders looking to collaborate with one another and identify solutions to some of the biggest challenges of our time. One of these tools is the use of competition to crowdsource innovations and strategies. And I'm delighted today to be speaking with perhaps the foremost pioneer in this space, Jay Morgan. Jay, it's a pleasure to have you join us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We've known each other for a long time, and I have deep respect for your work. And your work is known throughout the sector. But Common Pool has never sought the spotlight. So let's start by pulling back the curtain a bit. I'd love for you to tell us about yourself and what inspired you to found the company.
Absolutely. I mean, my story starts when I was in graduate school, and I became very curious about this convergence between behavioral sciences and economics. And then when you layer in like electoral theory and ask the questions like, what drives people to do things differently and better? Like a lot of that, we're just now kind of at the forefront of learning how that works. And so when I got out of grad school, I then went to work for the mayor of Chicago, and I had a chance to implement programs that had competitions that were involved in competitions, how to get kids and families and organizations to compete for resources within the city. And that was a great learning experience. But my story after that is very much like the same stories as you find with your members, right? It's how do we do philanthropy better? How do we reinvent philanthropy? And how do we apply new tools to philanthropy? And so at the end of the day, we've built a really great business that is effectively an assessment platform, which allows us to run a wide range of different type of projects for a very wide range of different clients. But we're also a service business. So as you said, we like to stand behind our clients. We like to give them the spotlight, and we like to just make sure that everything runs properly and that whatever brand or cause activation needs to occur, really that benefits our clients more than it benefits us.
So I know we're going to touch on this a little bit later, but why competition? What do you see as a differentiator for driving impact with competition?
Yeah, it's funny because in a way, philanthropy tries to shy away from some of the more free market aspects of what we do, right? And so if you think about what an RFP is, right? Or if you think about how a foundation deploys capital, at some point in that process, you're asking for people to either provide you information and then to fairly compare or assess those different proposals or those different solutions. And that's a competition. At its core, that's a competition. Today, we run a lot of contracts with NASA and with the European Commission and governments like the United Arab Emirates or the government of Sweden, a lot in Northern Europe, where they're coming to us and they're saying, we need to reinvent how procurement or tender notices or RFPs work. It is a competition. Let's just improve upon that process using new tools and new technologies. And we're well positioned to take that work because of our track record, both branding these things as open competitions and widening the aperture so that when the government or any agency has a call for proposals or solutions, it's more open, it's more fair, it's more transparent.
So can you walk us through how it works? If I am a family who is interested in the environment or education, and I'm leveraging traditional grant making as a tool for social impact, but I'm considering other ways to do this. And I've heard about prizes, I've heard about competition-based strategies. How might this work?
That's a great question. So it's really kind of this tale of two stories, right? So in the one instance, you'll have a family that will come to us and they'll say something like, we live in Phoenix, Arizona, and there's a very serious drought and water scarcity problem here. We want to solve this, and we've seen the work that you've done before. We think that you might have the right model to do something really great here in our community. In that interest, we have a very specific process that we take them through in order to clarify the question or the problem that we're trying to solve, in order to gauge the amount of incentives that are required in order to help solve that problem, and then to put together a branded kind of program that will run online and that will appeal to a wide range of people. In other instances, we have families that come to us and say, we care about a lot of causes, but we're really interested in kind of how you do what you do. And so help us figure out what we want to solve for But at the end of the day, we like the leverage that prizes give us because, we're going to put out this open call. Everyone else is going to spend their resources trying to solve it or to trying to propose the solution. And we're only going to reward the one where we have data to validate that that's the best option for us. And so they really like these how questions. And when we start to unbundle that, it really is interesting because the conversation will shift away from kind of the more competitive aspects. And then we get into these notions of the work that we do building community or community of practice and how collaboration is a very important aspect of the work that we do.
So in a lot of ways, it democratizes giving, right? It thinks about the premise of going out to market and asking who's best equipped to address a problem, a challenge, and invites in ideas from the general public and ultimately rewards those who have the most compelling and promising interventions, correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. And this is where I'm going to reveal a bias or a preference that I've had for a very long time. And that's that I think when people get into philanthropy, oftentimes they're left with very few tools or options to try and deal with the causes that they care about. And sometimes that's, the only thing available to them is maybe hiring a program officer and having that person go out and to find something that meets their needs and then to make a bet on that one or those one or two agencies that will receive those grants. I would say, and I believe strongly, that there's not enough transparency in how that works. And there's a lot of reasons why there's so much opacity or lack of transparency in grant making. Part of it is an operational burden. It's hard for people to imagine allowing anybody to submit an application and how they would process that much information and then assess it fairly, right? And the other reason is because we have a certain kind of catharsis that's occurred. This is just the way it's always been done. So our goal is to bring more transparency, more openness, and more fairness, and to bring these new tools that we use, and we run these tools online that have a high degree of fidelity in terms of how we assess those applicants, how they go about producing those proposals, when and where they do that, and what rewards they get even if they don't win. Because a lot of times we're offering a value proposition, which is come and see what's required of you, what's that implied cost to propose your solution, and then start to realize that you're going to connect with other like-minded problem solvers. You're going to have an opportunity to kind of build around this application process so that you might want to launch this thing on your own. There's a lot of value proposition in the process.
So let's bring an example into this, and let's bring one in that has been in the headlines over the last few years. MacArthur's 100 and Change initiative. I remember talking to you before the initiative launched, and it just really resonated with me because it was an opportunity and is an opportunity to put significant capital to work for some of the world's most pressing problems. And it is purposefully vague because it wants to invite in applications from social impact agents that are looking to address a broad range of challenges. So can you walk us through the evolution of 100 and Change and how you built this model and ultimately what it's doing today? And I would encourage you to start from the beginning. What did MacArthur want to accomplish with this project?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to say that, I founded this company in March of 2010. So we've been around for 10 years, and we've all kind of been waiting for this opportunity for more institutional philanthropy to start using this approach. And so I really have to give credit to Julia Stash and her board. Julia Stash had been at the MacArthur Foundation for a while, and when she assumed the leadership role there, she went to the board and she said, listen, we are kind of reinventing the foundation, but one of the things we have to recognize is sometimes we're not the smartest person in the room. And it takes a really, it takes a really forward-thinking leader to make that statement and to stand behind it. And so what she said is part of our portfolio is going to include this wide kind of open call for the greatest solutions from the widest base of potential applicants so that we can find out what we don't know, really. And, what happened with that is that the second you start handing that off to a team, they start dealing with all of these very difficult issues, more operational than anything else. Even if you agree with the vision of that, which most foundations do. Most foundations are open to being open. but a lot of them just don't know how to do that specifically. So they came to us and they saw our track record and they saw how we do this. And it was a really interesting initial conversation, because when we did the first $100 million competition with them, we're now on the second with them. The challenge for us was not so much the amount of money. It was the fact that, as you said, it was very open. They were agnostic to any specific issue area. So it was, give us your best $100 million proposal. And then we had to build a scoring rubric and a scoring protocol that could accept or accommodate a very wide range of applications. That was the hard part for us. Because we built technologies that allow for us to statistically normalize that assessment using a distributed panel of judges, that wasn't a problem at all. It was writing the application in the rubric that could allow us to fairly compare, say, somebody doing solar panels in Philadelphia and somebody building kind of prosthetic limbs in Nairobi. That was the tough part. But when we got into this and we said to them, listen, there are very specific kind of barriers that we have to deal with here. Like the number of applications that we receive have to be normalized, statistically normalized against different measures of distribution, which requires each ballot application to have 5 reviews. So, because you can imagine, Nick, you know, you get 1,000 applications, you need 5,000 reviews, which means you need 500 judges each looking at 10 applications, just to give you a sense of the numbers, right? So there's a point at which that model, it doesn't break, but it bends. Now, we were already dealing with other clients that were dealing with this kind of throughput issue. We did one for Mike Bloomberg that required a lot of content, a lot of throughput. And so we started to suggest notions to them like, listen, how about if we did a peer-to-peer review in the first round where the applicants would have to judge each other? And as a result of that experience, they would learn from one another and they would go on social media channels and they would share that information. And so while we didn't do that in the first competition, 100 and change competition, we have since adopted that in the second. So there's been this evolution both in their understanding and our shared experience designing and running this program. And today, the 100 and change program actually does incorporate peer-to-peer review as the first round of assessment. And we've seen huge success when you ask people on the front lines of these issues, hey, we're going to harness you to help score others that have similar concepts. Those are actually the best judges you can find. And those are the people that can really read through those applications and see where the real meat is. So we've had a better assessment, we've been able to build more community, and we've had better success, in my opinion.
Yeah, there are a few things that really stand out to me and stood out to me and continue to stand out to me from the competition. One is that I went into it with some skepticism, thinking, well, what is the level of due diligence that can be done on these organizations, and what is the interest that's going to be generated? And both of those were debunked. There's incredible interest, and the due diligence was powerful. So when I reflect on 100 and change and your process overall at Common Pool, I think about 2 solutions that you provide to giving families and to private foundations that are imperative. One is sourcing of opportunities, right? You mentioned this earlier, right? Philanthropists have limited time, and yet they know that they're drawn to support a particular community or issue. And so being able to outsource the sourcing of the identifying of opportunities is powerful. What then needs to come next is due diligence. And you all take care of that due diligence and do it with a rigor that honestly is only seen at the highest of institutional philanthropies. Can you talk a little bit about the due diligence process? Talk about some of the questions that you're asking on the applications, the way that you know that these applicants are ready to accept and receive this capital and put it to work.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're making some great points there. I think that there's a few things we try and achieve as we set out to build these protocols and as we set out to write these applications and these scoring processes. One is rigor, and you've talked about that. Now, our job at the end of the day is to rank order proposals or content. And the masks that we use to execute that strategy are very specific, but they're always published on each one of those websites. And so there's this total, almost radical accountability that we take on, because we know that in order to attract people to participate in these programs, they need to know what those costs are. They need to know exactly what they're getting into. And so that's a big part of the strategy. And so them understanding the rigor that we're going to put them through and the rigor that our clients require of us is the first step. When you get into the applications themselves, writing the applications, a lot of times what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the most authentic and data-driven information we can. But sometimes this comes in the form of a story. And so our applicants are telling us the story of the team that came together in order to make this proposal. Sometimes it's about projected impact, and that varies from competition to competition. But a lot of these applications are written in a way that you can kind of understand exactly what they're trying to do, exactly how they're trying to do it. And then we get to these friction points within that process where we're asking questions which we call summative questions, like give us your budget, give us your project plan, information that can be fairly compared across all of the applications. But sometimes we ask these questions, Nick, which we call formative questions. And this is where we're saying, as part of the application process, we want you to interview stakeholders or show that you have an authentic understanding of local conditions. You're going to make this intervention. And when we ask those formative questions, usually these teams get very invested in understanding those communities and understanding the needs of those communities. And oftentimes they will go on to launch these projects without the sponsor, whether they win or not. So these formative questions that we're able to build into the process get people more attached and more informed, especially when you're looking at bringing in outsiders who maybe haven't worked in a space before, who bring in new technology, new technical approaches. Getting them invested in the cause is a big part of this. And then lastly, I would say that, you know, being transparent also means you have to say, here's how you're going to get scored. Here's who's going to score you. Here's what you're going to get if you win, and here's what you're going to get if you don't win. And so all of that is laid out on those websites so that people can, for the first time, feel like, hey, this isn't rigged at all. This is something where I can compete on a level playing field, and only based on the merit of my proposal will I make it through this process.
So we talked about the MacArthur Foundation and $100 million, but what about the families that are looking to do $100,000 or $50,000? Is it possible to use competition and incentive-based strategies?
Absolutely. I mean, we run programs that are fellowship programs, which have zero cash awards tied to them. And we run $100 million competitions. We've run a competition once where the increment of reward was $50. It was around educational assessment. And we saw that the fair market value of the solutions that would be proposed were worth $50. So we, in the course of our engagement with any client, we write what we call a pricing study. And a pricing study really says, okay, like, what are you asking for? Are you going to claim the intellectual property that's going to come through this process or not? Like, really looking at it from the perspective of the applicant and what they have to give up or do in order to solve this problem. You know, there was a guy named Armand Hammer who was a philanthropist and a business, oil and gas business magnate in Los Angeles in the 1980s, and he was dying of a cancer, and he offered $1 million to cure his cancer, which was, it got on the front page of the newspaper, it got some traction, but it cost about, you know, over $1 billion to get a chemical compound through the FDA. So there are times when we have to sit down with our clients and say, okay, are the rewards commensurate with the cost? And after we go through that exercise, it's very likely that we can offer prices much lower than people think that they need to put up. But in every case, we do conduct that exercise. So our formula, right, implies that we might come back and say, okay, we're going to lower the burden because we only have this much to offer. Or we're going to raise the amount that needs to be offered through a funding collaborative or some other way in order to meet your expectations. But it is a balancing act.
So what are the range of issues that you have addressed with Common Pools programs?
Yeah, you know, in the beginning, in the early days, it was all about deep science.
Yeah.
So we were doing competitions around predictive analytics, machine learning, very, very specific scientific questions that we're helping answer by bringing in new talent who had different areas of expertise that were kind of playing around in those sandboxes. Today, we go very wide as well. So let me give you some examples of the deep science work we're doing now. NASA came to us, they secured us as a contractor, and we are running a competition for the Mars landing mission. where the question is, how do you turn astronaut breath into glucose so that they can sustain life on the surface of the planet when they get there, right? We run another competition for NASA where it's how to open source the development of a new particle sensor for the International Space Station. And we deal with NASA's leading particle scientists. You can't imagine a more specific group of people than a group of particle scientists, right? So we can go very narrow and deep if you have a scientific question you want to solve. But then on the other hand, we just announced this competition called Equality Can't Wait with Melinda Gates and Mackenzie Bezos and some other sponsors that are about to emerge, where it's about driving gender equity, increasing power and influence for women in the United States by the year 2030. So we're going broad. We're also going very narrow. And there are a lot of recurring themes, like a lot of the projects we're doing right now are starting to kind of embrace both gender and racial equity. And these might be projects around housing or sustainable mobility services, but they're really starting to pull in a lot more equity issues because of the current climate.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because I really want to talk about the moment we're in, which is truly many moments and centuries of moments. But I'd love to hear your perspective on where the field is moving, based on the economic climate, based on the pandemic we're facing, and the much needed and overdue conversation on racism and on how we promote equity and justice for people in all communities.
Yeah, it's a very big question. Let me just tell you, let me give you two different answers, because on the one hand, from a business perspective, it's the best time for us to be doing this work. As everyone is at home and online and locked into their house or their home office, we're seeing massive spikes, oversubscription in our user bases for each of our competitions. And we run competitions for the European Commission that include multinational collaboratives, like we're working in China, in Italy, countries that have been deeply impacted by COVID and the pandemic. In those instances, we're seeing we will set a target goal for the number of registrants and the number of applicants we're going to get. And we've seen manifold oversubscription, like 300, 500%, because people are working from home, they're working online, and they want to channel that energy into something. And so being able to do that, I think it provides a positive outlet, and it brings in a lot more interesting content. So I feel very good about that. In terms of where we are as kind of a sector and where philanthropy is going, I think it's the perfect time to start thinking about more equity in the process, as well as more equity in the outcome, right? So can we invite people who maybe are working on the front lines of these causes, but that have never had a fair chance to put forth their idea, right? I mean, we just closed a competition on homelessness in Los Angeles County, which is now a very, very severe problem in this community. And we're having people apply that are seasoned social workers that have always had that notion of what they could do better, but they never had a voice. They never had an opportunity to actually put together a team and a proposal. And those are, sometimes innovation is about that. It's about harvesting the people who've never had a voice before. And I think we're starting to see the measure of that today. And I think that's starting to translate into very real operational steps that communities are taking. So I think now's the right time and the right place to be doing more of this work.
It's a really powerful comment that you just made around participatory grant making and the importance of listening to those whom you seek to serve and understanding the needs of a community. And so it's fascinating to understand the use of competitions to be able to source ideas from ultimately the beneficiaries whom you seek to serve. And that's a powerful reminder that this is about a feedback loop, and it's about engaging many different diverse perspectives in the pursuit of social impact. So thank you for sharing that. How are people using competitions during COVID? Have you seen any specific competitions emerge, requests from clients related to addressing resiliency efforts or recovery efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even when we're taking on new projects that are really not so much about the pandemic or some of these equity issues. Maybe there's a very more specific cause in those communities. We're seeing kind of a rewriting of those purpose statements so that they can draw in some of that energy and some of that problem. So there's we used to get maybe about 2 or 3 unsolicited calls a month from people that had heard about us or seen our work and that wanted to kind of use our model. Now that's gone up about fivefold. We're getting dozens of calls from folks that, you know, for the first time want to say we're going to democratize this grant making process because we need more democracy, we need strength in democracy. And we're actually running a competition on how to address issues in democracy in this country right now with a $10 million prize purse.
Awesome. That's incredible. You know, it's so exciting to hear about all the work you're doing. I know we're coming up on time, so I want to close with a question here. You mentioned that your company celebrated your 10-year anniversary, so congratulations. I'd love to hear about where the next 10 years will take you and where the field is moving.
Yeah, we really work in 3 sectors. We work in philanthropy, and we've seen a very interesting climb in terms of the use of this approach. McKinsey published a study in 2009 that showed that the adoption of these models, these prize philanthropy models, was increasing at about 18% a year leading up to 2009. We think that underestimated what was actually happening because they were only looking at prizes of $100,000 or more. So that number alone is an underestimation, and the exponential growth in that since 2009 has been really impressive. We also work in government. That's like our next vertical, our next sector. And government is interesting because we've seen a very slow but deliberate climb there as well. In January of 2011, the America Competes Act was passed, which allowed U.S. federal agencies to run prize competitions in lieu of traditional grant making or programmatic resource allocations. And so we have seen a lot of different agencies do that. This is a very bipartisan thing. We've seen Democrats and Republicans get behind this. And today we're running prizes for the Bureau of Reclamation, the Department of Homeland Security, NASA, a lot of groups. And every year a report is published by the federal government that says, look at how this is working. So local, regional governments have been picking up on this. A lot of interest internationally, particularly within Western Europe and Northern Europe, but the Middle East as well, and increasingly Asia. The third sector is really the commercial sector or the private industry sector. And there we've seen a lot more resistance. So we've seen a lot of folks like, you think of Johnson & Johnson or Procter & Gamble as a company that has an internal research and development team. They make investments in those internal R&D teams. So it's very hard to convince them that, well, if we just open source that same process, you could get better results. But we've yet seen progress there too. At the end of the day, we're a social enterprise, so we're less interested in the more commercial business problem solving that we can do and more kind of the corporate social responsibility. And we've been proud of our corporate partners that have used us in that respect, and we hope to see more of it.
Well, we're excited to continue to follow the progress of Common Pool over the next 10 years. And congratulations to you and the team. You've done a lot of extraordinary work to impact the field and to longstanding social issues. So thank you, Jay, for your time, and we look forward to future conversations.
Absolutely, Nick. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you soon.